She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even look sorry. In a room filled with power, money, and America's most influential leaders, a crystal wine glass tilted, and red wine poured slowly down the face of a black man who never raised his voice. Cameras froze. Forks stopped midair. In that single, humiliating moment, hatred felt loud, deliberate, and proud. What no one in that ballroom understood, especially the woman holding the glass, was that this wasn't just an act of racism. It was a declaration of war she didn't know she had started. The man she publicly degraded stood perfectly still, eyes calm, dignity unbroken, while an entire empire began to collapse behind her back. Anger burned in his chest, not as rage, but as something colder, control. If you stay, you'll witness how one quiet smile turns into devastating consequences, and how a single moment of hate ignites a reckoning no amount of money can stop. The first thing Marcus Ellison noticed wasn't the chandeliers. It was the silence. Not the polite, comfortable quiet of wealth, but the kind that followed a sharp intake of breath. The kind that meant someone had said something they shouldn't have. Someone had crossed a line and didn't even realize it yet. Marcus stood near the edge of the grand ballroom at the Grand Arc Light Hotel in San Mateo, adjusting the cuff of his navy suit. The fabric was tailored, understated, expensive, but not loud. He preferred it that way. Power didn't need to announce itself. Around him, crystal glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell. Old money mingled with new tech wealth. This was the Federal Defense Charity Gala, where influence changed hands quietly, over wine and polite smiles. Marcus had attended hundreds of events like this in his life. He had learned long ago how to read rooms like maps, and this room had a fault line running straight through it. Across the ballroom, Cassandra Hale moved like she owned the air itself. She was beautiful in a polished, sharp-edged way. Designer gown, flawless makeup, posture trained to dominate any space she entered. People stepped aside as she passed, not out of respect, but instinct. Cassandra didn't ask for attention. She expected it. Marcus had already seen enough of her tonight. She had snapped her fingers at a Latino server, sent champagne back twice, and loudly asked whether the black valet knew how to handle luxury vehicles. Each remark landed softly on the surface. Smiles, laughs, plausible deniability. But the intent underneath was razor sharp. Racism didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered, confident it wouldn't be challenged. Marcus watched without reacting. He always did. At table 12, 3 senior officials from the U.S. Defense Headquarters were deep in discussion. Marcus joined them calmly, greeting each with a nod, a handshake, quiet respect. No theatrics, no posturing. He felt eyes on him almost immediately. Cassandra noticed him not because he stood out, but because he didn't shrink. That bothered her. "Who is that?" she whispered to Lydia Crowell, her longtime socialite friend. Lydia glanced over. "No idea. Probably some diversity invite. You know how these events are now." Cassandra's lips tightened. A black man, sitting comfortably with defense officials, laughing lightly, exchanging business cards, not overcompensating, not apologizing for his presence. To Cassandra, that was an offense in itself. She turned to her husband, Ethan Hale, CEO of Hale Defense Systems, and gripped his arm. "Do you know him?" Ethan followed her gaze. "No." "Cassandra, please. Don't start. Tonight matters." It mattered because Hale Defense was bleeding contracts, because the Pentagon was shifting toward newer players, because the Federal Advanced Defense Office was quietly evaluating partners for a massive UAV initiative, one that could save or destroy companies. Ethan knew that. Cassandra didn't care. She cared about order, about hierarchy, about reminding people where they belonged. As dinner progressed, Cassandra's irritation grew. Marcus remained calm, attentive, composed. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, people leaned in. That infuriated her. Finally, Cassandra stood. She picked up her wine glass, not angrily but deliberately, like someone who believed the room would bend to her will. "I think there's been a mistake," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "With the seating." Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Cassandra approached table 12, heels clicking against marble like a countdown. Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze evenly. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the certainty, the assumption. "Excuse me," Cassandra said, smiling thinly. "This table is reserved for defense leaders and real contractors." Marcus folded his hands on the table. "My invitation says table 12. Is there an issue?" Her smile sharpened. "I'm Cassandra Hale. Hale Defense Systems. My family has served this country for generations." One of the officials nodded politely. "Good evening, Mrs. Hale." But Cassandra's eyes never left Marcus. "I couldn't help but notice," she continued, "that you seem out of place." A quiet ripple moved through the room. Marcus remained seated. "I'm here representing myself." "Representing yourself," she repeated, amused. "And what would that be? A diversity initiative? Some outreach program?" A tech executive shifted uncomfortably. Marcus's voice stayed level. "I'm here to assess potential partners for a federal defense program." Cassandra laughed, not a soft laugh, a sharp one. "You," she said, "assess us?" She leaned closer. "What exactly qualifies you to judge companies like mine?" Marcus stood slowly. He was taller than she expected. His presence changed the air, subtle but unmistakable. Before he could respond, Cassandra raised her voice. "I'm tired of pretending," she said loudly now, "that skin color equals qualification. Families like mine built this industry. We earned our place." Ethan pushed through the crowd. "Cassandra, stop." She ignored him. "Too many people," she continued, "are sitting in rooms they don't belong in." The silence was absolute. Then Cassandra lifted her glass. "Get him away from this table," she said coldly. "You people need to learn your place." The wine poured in a clean arc. Red splashed against Marcus's hair, his collar, his suit, slowly, deliberately, dripping onto the white tablecloth like a stain no one could ignore. Gasps filled the room. Phones appeared. Marcus didn't move. Wine slid down his cheek. He blinked once. Then he smiled. Not angry, not wounded. Knowing. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and dabbed at the stain with calm precision. "Interesting," he said quietly. Security rushed forward, but Marcus raised a hand. "No need." He looked at Cassandra steadily. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale. You've been very clear." Cassandra straightened, triumphant. But no one clapped. No one smiled. Ethan looked like a man watching his world collapse in real time. Marcus turned, nodding once to the officials. "Gentlemen, ma'am." Then he walked away. Behind him, Cassandra basked in what she thought was victory, unaware that she had just ended her family's legacy with a single act of hatred. She didn't know who Marcus Ellison really was. She didn't know what he controlled. And she had no idea how fast consequences travel when power is quiet. Before we continue this story, pause for a moment and think about what you just witnessed, because what happens next will change everything. If you were in that room, would you have spoken up or stayed silent, yes or no? Your answers matter more than you think. The night didn't end when Marcus Ellison walked out of the ballroom. For Cassandra Hale, it was only the beginning. By the time dessert was served at the Grand Arc Light Hotel, the room had fractured into two kinds of silence. One was loud, whispers, frantic murmurs, phones buzzing under tablecloths. The other was heavy, the kind carried by people who knew they had just witnessed something unforgivable. Cassandra felt neither. She stood tall, chin lifted, wine glass empty in her hand like a trophy. Around her, a few familiar faces offered tight smiles, the kind people give when they don't want to challenge power. That was all the confirmation she needed. "This had to be done," she said, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "Somebody needed to remind him where he belongs." No one answered. Across the room, Ethan Hale finally reached her. His face was drained of color. "What did you do?" he whispered. "What you were too weak to do," Cassandra replied. "I protected our family, our company." Ethan stared at the dark stains still spreading across the tablecloth where Marcus had been sitting. "You humiliated a man in front of Pentagon officials." "He humiliated himself by pretending," she snapped. "You saw how he was acting, like he owned the place." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure he recognized the woman standing in front of him. They left early. By the time Cassandra slipped into the passenger seat of their black SUV, the first videos were already online. At home, Cassandra kicked off her heels and poured herself another glass of wine. She scrolled through her phone, smiling as her name began trending. She saw outrage, but she also saw applause. Messages praising her for saying what everyone's thinking, invitations to speak, interview requests. She felt vindicated. At 2:14 a.m., she posted on her personal account, "Sometimes you have to defend standards. Merit still matters. No apologies." She hit send without hesitation. Across the bay, Marcus Ellison stood alone on his balcony, the city lights stretching out below him like a quiet battlefield. He had already changed his suit, but the faint smell of wine lingered. He wasn't angry. He was tired. He thought about the looks on the faces around that table. Not shock, not confusion. Recognition. Too many people had seen moments like this before and stayed silent. Tonight, someone hadn't. Marcus had learned early in his career that racism didn't need volume to be deadly. It needed permission, and Cassandra Hale had given it publicly. At 6:02 a.m., Ethan Hale stood in his home office, staring at a red line plunging across his screen. Hale Defense Systems, down 11% in pre-market trading. By 6:17, it was down 18. His phone vibrated nonstop. Board members, investors, partners, all asking the same question. What the hell happened? "Get me everything on Marcus Ellison," Ethan told his assistant. "Everything." An hour later, the report came back thin. Too thin. No social media, no corporate bio, no public interviews. Just a quiet military record and a string of classified clearances. "That's not possible," Ethan muttered. "Nobody is this invisible." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, people at that level usually are." Ethan's stomach dropped. Meanwhile, Cassandra was thriving on attention. She appeared on a morning show just after 9, her hair flawless, her voice calm and unapologetic. "I did nothing wrong," she told the host. "That man was clearly out of place. I stood up for American values." The clip went viral within minutes, but the response wasn't what she expected. Veterans spoke out. Defense analysts reacted with disbelief. Former service members, Black, white, Latino, shared stories of being treated exactly the way Marcus had been treated. Hashtags multiplied. Sponsors quietly distanced themselves. At 11:30 a.m., Ethan received a call from a blocked number. "Mr. Hale," a woman said evenly, "this is Colonel Susan McAllister from the U.S. Defense Headquarters. You're requested at an emergency meeting. Today, 2 p.m. "What is this regarding?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. "Last night's incident," she replied, "involving General Marcus Ellison." The word general landed like a gunshot. Ethan arrived at the Pentagon early, hands shaking as he waited outside a secured conference room. Inside, voices murmured. Laughter. Brief, controlled. The door opened. Marcus Ellison sat at the head of the table, dressed now in full military uniform, medals aligned with surgical precision. The same calm, the same quiet authority. Ethan felt his knees weaken. "Please sit," Marcus said. Ethan sat. "You should know," Ethan began, desperate. "My wife doesn't represent our company." Marcus raised a hand gently. "Character isn't measured by job titles, Mr. Hale. It's revealed under pressure." Screens lit up around the room, footage from the gala, Cassandra's words, her post, her interview. "This," Marcus continued, "was a cultural assessment." Ethan swallowed hard. "The Federal Advanced Defense Office doesn't just evaluate technology," Marcus said. "We evaluate trust, judgment, leadership." He paused. "The UAV contract, worth over $1 billion, has been reassigned." Ethan's vision blurred. "Furthermore," Deputy Secretary Laura Bennett added, "we are initiating a full review of all existing Hale defense contracts." The room felt airless. "There is something you can do," Marcus said at last. Ethan leaned forward. "Anything. Remove your wife from all influence over the company. Commit to real change, not optics. And understand this." Marcus met his eyes. Some consequences don't reverse. When Ethan returned home, Cassandra was already setting up lights for another interview. He shut everything down. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "You called a black general an animal," Ethan said quietly, "and you destroyed everything." She laughed. "You're overreacting." Ethan shook his head. "You never learned what power actually is." That evening, the board convened. By midnight, Cassandra Hale was removed from all roles, her trust frozen, her name erased from the company she believed she owned. She sat alone in the living room, phone buzzing with missed calls, realizing, too late, that the world she thought was built for her had rules she never bothered to learn. And somewhere across the city, Marcus Ellison prepared to make sure no one else would have to endure what he had endured in silence. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in waves. For Cassandra Hale, the first wave was disbelief. She sat alone in the living room of the house she once believed was untouchable, staring at the blank television screen. Her phone lay face down on the marble table. Silent now after hours of nonstop buzzing. No interviews, no producers, no supporters, only silence. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Former defense contractor's wife removed after racist Gala incident board cuts. Ties as Hale Defense faces federal review racism, power, and consequences. A corporate reckoning. Cassandra read them with clenched teeth. She told herself this was temporary, that outrage always faded, that money, status, and connections always won in the end. She was wrong. At Hale Defense Systems, the reckoning was brutal but necessary. Ethan Hale stood before a room full of employees, engineers, analysts, technicians, veterans, many of whom had watched the Gala footage in shock and anger. Some had worked under Cassandra's shadow for years. Some had filed complaints that never went anywhere. Some had stayed silent because they needed their jobs. Ethan didn't defend himself. He didn't defend her. What happened wasn't a misunderstanding, he said, voice steady but stripped of arrogance. It was a mirror. He announced sweeping changes, real ones. Independent oversight, leadership restructuring, mandatory bias accountability tied to performance, not appearances. He invited outside organizations to audit the company's culture publicly, knowing the findings would be painful. This company will either become better, he said, or it won't survive at all. For many in the room, it was the first time they believed him. Across the country, General Marcus Ellison stood at a podium inside the U.S. Defense Headquarters, cameras flashing softly. He had been asked to speak. He didn't have to, but he did. This was never about me, Marcus said calmly. It was about what we tolerate when we think no one important is watching. He spoke about service, about leadership, about how racism wasn't just personal cruelty, it was a national security risk, about how soldiers of every color fought side by side, trusting one another with their lives while systems at home still questioned their worth. His words traveled far beyond Washington. European news outlets picked up the story. Veterans organizations shared the clip. Students discussed it in classrooms. Boardrooms quietly re-examined who they protected and why. Policies changed. The Federal Advanced Defense Office introduced new evaluation standards. Companies would no longer be judged solely on innovation and cost, but on workplace culture, leadership accountability, and demonstrated respect for human dignity. Some executives complained. Most complied. Change had momentum now, and Cassandra Hale was no longer insulated from it. Her father, Franklin Hale, didn't raise his voice when he came to see her. That hurt more. "You embarrassed this family," he said quietly. "But worse, you revealed who we failed to stop you from becoming." Her trust fund remained frozen. Her name was removed from charitable boards. Invitations vanished. Friends stopped calling. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later. Cassandra signed them without tears. She moved into a small apartment in East Bay, far from the circles that once shielded her. As part of a legal settlement tied to civil complaints and corporate liability, she was required to complete community service. She laughed at first. Then she arrived. The shelter smelled like disinfectant and worn fabric. Folding chairs, long tables, people with tired eyes and guarded expressions. Many were black, many were veterans. Cassandra stood frozen, apron in hand, feeling something unfamiliar twist in her chest. Fear. No one yelled at her. No one recognized her. They simply waited to be served. One afternoon, an older man approached the counter. Walter Brooks. His posture was stiff, his movements slow. "Thank you," he said quietly as she handed him a tray. Their eyes met. He didn't know who she was. He just saw another person. That night, Cassandra didn't sleep. Weeks passed, then months. She listened more than she spoke. She heard stories she had spent her entire life dismissing as excuses. She watched people fight quietly every day just to survive. Nothing absolved her past, but something shifted. Across the city, Marcus Ellison visited a military hospital. He spoke with young recruits, some nervous, some angry, some hopeful. He told them the truth. "You'll be tested," he said, "not just by enemies, but by people who think you don't belong. Your dignity is your weapon. Never give it away." At Hale Defense Systems, the transformation began to show results. Diverse leadership wasn't cosmetic, it was effective. Productivity rose. Trust returned. Slowly, contracts followed, not because of forgiveness, but because of proof. Ethan didn't call it redemption. He called it responsibility. 1 year later, Marcus and Ethan stood on the same stage at a defense ethics summit in Berlin. Two men from different worlds, bound by a moment neither would forget. "We can't erase the past," Marcus said, "but we can refuse to repeat it." Cassandra watched the broadcast from her apartment. She didn't change the channel. She didn't look away. For the first time, she understood that consequences weren't cruelty. They were correction. And correction, when accepted, could lead to something better. Not forgiveness, but growth. The story didn't end with applause. It ended with accountability, with systems changing, with silence breaking, with power learning to listen, and with one undeniable truth standing taller than any fortune or title. A person's worth is not decided by the color of their skin, but by the weight of their character when no one forces them to choose. Now, before you leave, take a moment and reflect. How did this story make you feel? What do you think about the choices each character made? If you like this story and believe conversations like this matter, comment 111 below. Tell us which country you're watching from. And please share this video, because change only spreads when stories are told.